All right, notice that Paul presupposes the existence of God. The God ultimately is behind all that. The unknown God is really God himself. That he uses their own views and beliefs to show that God indeed is true, and they ultimately, self-evidently, know that God exists. In Psalms 14:1a, we see the psalmist say, "The fool says in his heart, there is no God." The antithesis to God's existence is considered to be foolish to the biblical writers. It's not a wise thing to take. It's not considered wisdom to deny the existence of God.
Lord, I shall give these laws unto thy people. Hear me. Oh, hear me. All pay heed. The Lord Jehovah has given unto you these 10 commandments for all to obey.
Hello, and welcome to Apologetics 101. I'm your host, Christian apologist Brian Keith Bowen. We're here today with part 2 of my Genesis series. Remember, we're going through chapters 1 through 11, dealing with the text as well as topological matters concerning all the arguments, the issues, and how to understand and properly interpret Genesis 1 through 11. And so it's a commentator series about Genesis chapters 1 through 11, but it deals also with specific topics. Next week we got Dr. Jason Lau coming on here for a interview on the origin of the universe next Wednesday. That's going to be awesome. Last time we did an exegetical commentary on chapter 1, going through the Hebrew and so forth. Today we're going to have a discussion about the existence of God. The Bible seems to presuppose God's existence. It doesn't try to go through a bunch of arguments trying to prove God's existence. It does presuppose God's existence. And but a lot of times when we're convincing others, we are trying to persuade them that God exists. But in presuppositional apologetics, we acknowledge that everybody, according to Romans 1, already believes that God exists. What we do is we expose that suppressed knowledge because they suppress the truth and unrighteousness, Romans 1 tells us. So they actually know that God exists, but they are suppressing that knowledge of the truth. But they have to borrow from our worldview in the process if they are to deny the Creator, which is self-evident that created all things. And today we're going to go over the several arguments that have been passed and proposed. The Kalam Cosmological Argument, the Teleological Argument, the Moral Argument, the Ontological Argument, and the one that I prefer is the Transcendental Argument that I use. I've used some of the other arguments as well, but I think the Transcendental Argument is basically like one argument that basically can comprise some of the other stuff that you can do with the other arguments, except the Transcendental Argument is more to deal with absolute certainty involving the existence of God rather than simply a high probability that God exists, but rather an absolute certainty that God exists, how we know that God does exist. And so forth. So it's a very strong argument, and today we're going to be discussing that in part 2 of this series. I'm really excited for it. I've got a big presentation in line for you, and we will start it right now. Hello again. Welcome to Apologetics 101. We are going to be doing on the existence of God, specifically on the Transcendental Argument. I've already did a video with Dr. Jason Lau on the presuppositional apologetics and Transcendental Argument a while back. But this is going to be much more broader. It's going to deal with other arguments that people have come up with for the existence of God as well, and we're going to have that discussion also. But without further ado, let's dive into this. Okay, the Bible presupposes the existence of God. It doesn't try to go through a strong presentation of God because God is self-evident. So the biblical writers presuppose the existence of God. So that's important to note that it starts out with that presupposition initially. Acts 17:22-31, we see Paul speaking here, or that Luke is talking about Paul, and Luke tells us, so he says, so Paul, standing in the midst of Areopagus, said, men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you, the God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by men, nor does he serve made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling places or place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. And yet he is actually not far off from each of us, for in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone or an image formed by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. That's in the ESV. All right, notice that Paul presupposes the existence of God. The God ultimately is behind all that. The unknown God is really God himself. That he uses their own views and beliefs to show that God indeed is true, and they ultimately, self-evidently, know that God exists. In Psalms 14:1a, we see the psalmist say, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. The antithesis to God's existence is considered to be foolish to the biblical writers. It's not a wise thing to take. It's not considered wisdom to deny the existence of God. Romans 1 goes as far as saying that now they are without excuse because God has revealed himself to everything which he had made. So he said that now they are without excuse in Romans 1. I don't have that on here, but he said Paul says that in Romans 1 that now they are without excuse, but he says that they suppress the truth in unrighteousness. All right, let's move on. All right, today we are going to be discussing 5 arguments for the existence of God, and these are all pretty good arguments. Although I think only the Transcendental Argument is truly irrefutable in every sense. These other arguments are good arguments that have not been refuted yet, but they are more dealing with probabilistically, showing a high probability of God's existence. All right, we're going to be I'm going to talk about these a little bit more in depth in a little bit. But Kalam Cosmological Argument, the Teleological Argument, the Moral Argument, the Ontological Argument, and the Transcendental Argument. All right, let's continue. All right, the Kalam Cosmological Argument. The Kalam Cosmological Argument basically says the premise 1, everything that begins to exist has a cause. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. In conclusion, therefore, the universe has a cause. All right. Okay. Objections. If everything that has a cause, then what caused God to exist? This is based on a common straw man argument that's a misrepresentation of the argument itself. The argument is not everything that began. Everything has a cause. The argument is everything that begins to exist has a cause. If the universe came into existence at a finite point in time, then that is an event. An event happened, and something can't happen without a cause. That's the ultimate claim. God is the eternal, timeless first cause or uncaused first cause. He would not need a cause because he's self-existing. Some things can come into existence without a cause from nothing, such as virtual particles. There's a thing called virtual particles, which some say reappear out of nothing, but really, virtual particles, if true, in theory, don't reappear out of nothing. They come out of what's called quantum fluctuations, which is actually not technically nothing. Some secular physicists will often use that and claim that quantum fluctuations are nothing, but in reality, quantum fluctuations are not nothing. And so it's not them coming out of nothing, it's something they're coming out of something, and something is actually causing their existence. The universe can appear without a cause if the universe came into existence by quantum fluctuations. This is another it's similar to the last argument, but it says that this happened as a result of quantum fluctuations and the supposed singularity in the supposed Big Bang. But in fact, this would not cause the universe come into being. For one thing, quantum fluctuations is not nothing; it's something, but there's nothing causative about it. It's passive. Quantum fluctuations cannot cause the universe itself to come into being. Plus, it's ad hoc. There's no evidence at all for it. Can't mathematical numbers prior to the Big Bang, quote unquote, Big Bang model, cause the universe? This is a theory that some people have where they think numbers prior to the alleged Big Bang would cause the universe to come into being. But mathematical numbers are conceptual, they are non-causative, they cannot cause anything to happen. And again, this is ad hoc. These are some of the objections I have on the Kalam Cosmological Argument. I have problems with, not really so much with the argument on this. On the first point, it's not really with the argument as much as the way people, like a lot older the creationists do. They will incorporate the Big Bang Theory into their argument. And so the question I have to ask is, do I have to assume the Big Bang caused the universe? The answer is no. Although many classical apologists incorporate the Big Bang cosmology into this argument, it is not required, especially since originally this argument was invented before the Big Bang model was invented. The second law of thermodynamics. This has to do with the beginning of the universe. You could actually show that the universe began to exist using the second law of thermodynamics because there's a lot of usable pockets of usable energy in the universe. But if the universe was eternal, then all that usable energy would eventually convert it to less usable energy, in which case our universe would result in what scientists call a heat death. And since there are lots and lots of pockets of usable energy, it is doubtful that this is the case. Actually, not just doubtful, it wouldn't even be possible. The universe definitely had a beginning. There are some philosophical arguments for the universe having a beginning that can also be used without incorporating the Big Bang model as well. Like Herbert's Hotel, you got an infinite number of rooms, and let's say they're all occupied. There's no vacancies, but let's say two left. Are there any vacancies? Well, if you have an infinite room, even if two left, there wouldn't be vacancies. You can also say about library books. This is another one I heard. Like if you have an infinite number of red books, infinite number of blue books in the library, and you checked out two blue books and two red books, how many red books and blue books are left? Well, if there was an infinite number to begin with, it would be an infinite number of red books, infinite number of blue books. Which ironically, you would have to add an infinite number of blue books to another infinite number of red books. You can also do this with fruit like apples. If you have infinite number of apples and you take away 3 apples and add 2 oranges or 2 apples, that sort of thing. How many apples we have? Well, if you started with an infinite number, you would still have an infinite number. You can't add infinite number of things to something, or you can't add something to an infinite number of things. It's just not possible. Um, absolute infinites of past events cannot exist as the object of it. If you have past events, you got one event on top of another event, adding to another event, and so forth. If you're jumping off from an eternal point, because it's not even a point, it's not a starting point, because there's no starting point in an eternal universe. And so you'd have to add past events constantly to an infinite number of other past events, which is not possible. Another analogy I use is what's called the bottomless pit analogy, in which, like, if you're at a bottomless pit at the end of a bottomless pit, I'm talking about a truly bottomless pit, not a, just a deep pit, but you're at the bottom of a truly bottomless pit, and can you climb your way out to the surface? Well, you would never be able to climb yourself to the top if you're truly at the bottom of a bottomless pit, which it wouldn't even be logically possible to even be at the bottom of the bottomless pit, truly bottomless pit. All right. Of course, you certainly couldn't jump out of one. This argument doesn't prove the Christian God, only a philosopher's, quote unquote, philosopher's God, a generic version of a creator of the universe. This is not controversial. This is something that's admitted by classical apologists. This is why they add the resurrection in it. Again, this is not really a failure to the argument. I consider this more of an inadequacy of the argument, because I'm a Christian, and I'm going to be concerned with proving the Christian God exists. I'm not concerned with proving, whether Allah, or consider, this is a creator, but maybe it's not really the Christian God. No, I prove the Christian God exists, and so this is an inadequacy of the Kalam Cosmological Argument, is it does not prove the Christian God exists. It only proves that a God, a creator of the universe, exists. And it does a good job of what it's intended to do, to prove that a creator of the universe exists. Now, who that creator is, whether that creator is God or not, whether it's the Christian God or not, those things are not answered by this argument. And so the argument for me as a Christian would be inadequate, because it doesn't really prove that the Christian God exists as a result. Okay, other objections. What about parallel universes? Some people suggest a parallel universe, but this is ad hoc. Why should anything exist at all? This is a question often asked by William Lane Craig. Essentially, you wouldn't expect the universe to have if the universe came into existence uncaused, then how could anything at all exist as a result? Because nothing begets nothing. And so if you wouldn't expect that the universe could possibly be caused by an uncaused, could be an uncaused event that get brought into the universe. And then nothing would exist at all as a result. Are there problems wrong with the Big Bang model that sometimes classical apologists use to incorporate into this argument? Yeah, there's a number of problems wrong with it, like the flatness problem, the horizon problem, the monopole problem, the problems with singularity. I won't go into details with these, because I will be dealing with these next week when I talk to Dr. Jason Lau. All right. Is the universe eternal? Simply, no, it is not. Again, second law of thermodynamics shows it's not eternal. The expansion of the universe, although the expansion of the universe cannot prove, in spite of what Big Bangers believe it to, that the universe started the way the Big Bang theory claims. What the expansion of the universe can do is it can prove that the universe is not eternal. Because if it was eternal, if it was possible to philosophically get to the present from an eternal past, then all the stars and galaxies and so forth by now would be flying apart, because the universe has been expanding since then. So the expansion of the universe can be used to prove the beginning of the universe. It cannot be used to prove the Big Bang theory, in spite what a lot of Big Bangers want to believe. All right. the cosmic microwave background. I threw this in there just because I do think that the origin of the universe resulted in the cosmic microwave background. I don't can't definitively know that for sure. I'm not sure about definitively. Um, but the CMB, any universe coming into being would have ultimately produced microwaves anyhow as a result of dispersion of energy and so forth. I don't think it happened the way in which the Big Bang theorists claim. A lot of times they claim it's because the universe cooled off and resulted from those microwaves, but they don't know that. And sometimes they'll even commit what's called affirming the consequent fallacy with it, but we'll get into that later on down the road. But anyway, philosophical arguments revisited. Again, you have physical arguments or philosophical arguments for the universe not being eternal, such as Herbert's Hotel. You got the library of books. You got absolute infinite cannot exist. You got the bottomless pit analogy. And so forth. These are philosophical arguments that show that there cannot be absolute. There's mathematical arguments, there's philosophical arguments, etc. Do we need the Big Bang model to prove the universe is not eternal? No, we don't. That's what the whole reason I was going through those arguments for, is to show you that you can prove the universe had a beginning without assuming the Big Bang theory. All right, now let's get to the teleological argument. Okay, the teleological argument essentially says, if designed, it had a designer. The universe and life has highly complex design. Therefore, the universe and life had a designer. All right, there are three basic concepts that I'm going to be discussing in the teleological argument. Personally, I like the teleological argument. I used it all the time. In fact, this was my main argument that I used before I started using the transcendental argument. But I do think you can use the teleological argument transcendentally because God is the best justification for why the universe looks designed. But there are three basic concepts that can be discussed in the use of the teleological argument: the anthropic principle, specified complexity, and irreducible complexity. I'll explain each one of these in detail. Okay, well, let's talk about the anthropic principle. Simply put, over 100 constants that are required for life on this planet and for the universe to exist. I think I heard 122. It might be more than that now. I heard that they're discovering them all the time. Essentially, it makes life possible on this planet, makes the universe able to exist and to function as the universe. Its atoms are able to be possible and so forth. If gravitational force was altered by 0. Lots of other zeros. I'm not gonna read that. 1%, or was weakened by 40 orders of magnitude, our sun would not exist, and neither would we. Wallace, as in J. Warner Wallace, had said, the constants and the proportions of the strong nuclear force, weak nuclear force, electromagnetic force, and the force of gravity must exist within a very narrow ranges in order for life to exist in the universe. The ratio of electrons to protons, both in their numbers and mass, must be precisely balanced. If the value of the ratio between the electromagnetic force and gravity was altered more than 1 in 10 to the 40th power, the universe would suffer a similar fate. The nature of the universe at the atomic level could have been different, but even remarkably small differences would have been catastrophic to our existence. Even Fred Hoyle concluded, who's an atheist, he's a famous atheist and astronomer. Fred Hoyle concluded, after studying the anthropic principle, a common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics. I always find it funny when an evolutionist uses the word monkey. Monkeyed with the physics, as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature. In addition to that, Michael Shermer of Skeptics Magazine, who's also a well-known atheist, has referred to this particular argument as a good argument in a recent interview with Lee Strobel in the Case of Miracles, page 63. All right, specify complexity, the origin of information. Okay, let me spell out something. Specify complexity deals with the information, the origin of information. It deals with the complexity of the information within the cell. And it basically shows that there is an amazing amount of design, but it also deals with the very origin of the information itself, which is a more fundamental problem to like evolutionary theory and so forth. The origin of information. This is a mystery for evolutionists since their views and speculations about the past cannot give us how information could have originated, nor can it give us how new body plans, which would require new information, could have happened through natural processes. The complexity of information. Cells and information are extremely complex. Evolutionist and atheist Richard Dawkins admits that the information found in just one small amoeba, which is a one-celled organism, is more than the entire Encyclopedia Britannica. All right, natural processes cannot give us rise to new information. As Werner Gitt, who's the world's foremost expert in information science, one of the world's foremost expert in information science, in his book, In the Beginning Was Information, says it like this: there is no natural law through which matter can give rise to information. Neither is there any physical process or material phenomenon known that can do this. There is no known sequence of events which can cause information to originate by itself in matter. And in addition to that, Werner also said, when its progress or information, referring to information, when its progress along the chain of transmission events is traced backwards, every piece of information leads back to a mental source, the mind of the sender. Every information ultimately goes back to our mind. When we see information in a book, like words on a page, we know it's not just monkeys playing around on a typewriter. We know that this information came from a mind. Someone of intelligence wrote the book. And we can also say that for any type of information that we see, information like computer program inside of a computer, we know that it did not happen there by accident. Whether instead it was purposely and intelligently assembled into the computer system. All right, let's continue. Okay, also, in addition to that, natural process cannot give rise to new information. As Stephen Mayer, who wrote Signature of the Cell, said, what humans recognize as information certainly originates from thought, from conscious or intelligent activity. A message received via fax by one person first arose as an idea in the mind of another. The software stored and sold on compact discs resulted from the design of a software engineer. The great works of literature began first as ideas in the minds of writers, Tolstoy, Austen, Danae. Our experience of the world shows that what we recognize as information invariably reflects the prior activity of conscious and intelligent persons. Also, mutations do not add new genetic information to the genome. Mutations do not add new genetic information to the genome. In fact, it always creates a loss of information, never a gain of new information. According to one of the world's renowned experts on mutations in the world, Lee Spetner, all point mutations that have been studied on the molecular level turn out to reduce the genetic information and not to increase it. Not even one mutation has been observed that adds a little information to the genome. That surely shows that there are not millions upon millions of potential mutations the theory, talking about evolution, demands. There may well not be any. The failure to observe even one mutation that adds information is more than just a failure to find support for the theory. It is evidence against the theory. We have a serious challenge to neo-Darwinian theory. All right, let's talk about irreducible complexity. The irony of this term is that it was invented by a theistic evolutionist named Michael Behe in Darwin's Black Box, The Biochemical Challenge to Evolution. The object was that although Behe believes in Darwinism at the surface level, he believes that Darwinism failed at the biochemical level, especially whenever it came to irreducible parts that he felt that natural selection couldn't explain. By irreducible complex, Michael Behe says, I mean a single system composed of several parts that contribute to the basic function, wherein the removal of any one of these parts causes the system to effectively cease functioning. Furthermore, Michael Behe also said an irreducible complex system cannot be produced directly, that is, by continuously improving the initial function, which continues to work by the same mechanism, by slight successive modifications of a precursor system, because any precursor to an irreducibly complex system that is missing a part is by definition non-functional. An irreducible complex biological system, if there is such a thing, would be a powerful challenge to Darwinian evolution. Since natural selection can only choose systems that are already working, then if biological systems cannot be produced gradually, it would have to arise as an integrated unit, meaning as one piece, in one one fell swoop, for natural selection to have anything to act on. Charles Darwin even admitted that to suppose that the eye, with all its imitable contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for emitting different amounts of light, and for correction of spherical and chromatic aberration, could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. If it could be demonstrated that any complex organ existed which could not possibly have been formed by numerous successive slight modifications, my theory would absolutely break down. In addition to that, Michael Behe also said biochemistry has demonstrated that any biological apparatus involving more than one cell, such as an organ or a tissue, is necessarily an intricate web of many different identifiable systems of horrendous complexity. The quote unquote simplest self-sufficient replicating cell has the capacity to produce thousands of different proteins and other molecules at different times and under variable conditions. Synthesis, degradation, energy generation, replication, maintenance of cell architecture, mobility, regulation, repair, communication, all these functions take place in virtually every cell, and each function itself requires the interaction of numerous parts. An irreducible complex system screams of design. Occam's razor claims that the simplest conclusion tends to be the correct one. Simply put, you don't multiply entities beyond what is necessary, and a complex argument typically end up doing this, but a more simplified explanation tends to be much more reducive in its explanation, and therefore it's not multiplying entities beyond what is necessary. And so this tend to be the correct one, according to Occam's razor. The most simplest conclusion to irreducible complex systems, that is, it was designed by the way of an intelligent mind. We would never assume that it happened by natural processes. This is also strong evidence of a creator. All right, now let's deal with the moral argument. The argument is premise one: if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Premise two: objective moral values and duties do exist. Conclusion: therefore, God exists. This is from William Lane Craig's Longard, Defending Your Faith with Reason and Precision, page 129. All right, we're going to talk about objective morality. And we're going to deal with some evidence for objective morality. And these evidences it's basically summarized and paraphrased and loosely argued from it. But basically, the evidences come from Scott B. Ray, his book, Moral Choices, an Introduction to Ethics, pages 35 to 37. It acted as my textbook in my ethics class, actually. the first piece of evidence is offered a moral reformation. As we move through time, we progress in our moral understanding. However, if morality was subjective, the moral progression would make little sense, if any. We would be making up and changing the rules as we go along. So moral reformers like Martin Luther King Jr. or Abraham Lincoln, who tries to improve morality, would be pointless in the endeavor. Right, one time, and then we realized later that slavery was wrong. The objective morality will only make best sense of moral progression if morality was indeed objective. All right, evidence number 2, evidence from the way we speak on moral matters. We speak on morality as if we say has value, and as if what we say has value and meaning. It becomes important for us if someone practiced proper morality. We feel convicted about it. Even one denies a moral precept, such as them condoning abortions or them supporting homosexual marriage. They would still feel sense of urgency to compel or convince you that you're wrong and that such actions should be condonable. We debate and argue about such matters because we know intuitively what is right and what is wrong, meaning that we actually know that there is an objective right and wrong ultimately. Number 3, moral mistakes. Evidence from this involves how we view the mistakes of others, even in the past. For example, would anyone condone the actions of Hitler or Stalin? Why do we react the way we do whenever we encounter people who do bad things, such as with the 9/11 incidents? We reacted to the injustice that was done, the taking of lives that happened in that incident, and being attacked on our own land. If these were the products of social conditioning, then Hitler's and Nazi Germany's mind, they were just trying to get rid of an quote unquote inferior race. This is not my view. This is their view historically. This is how they actually view this. In their mind, they were doing something right and noble. Then why don't we view it that way? Why do we see the things that they did as atrocious and horrible? It is because we have an intuitive sense that says that something is right or wrong, regardless of what someone believes or not. Okay, moral injustice. Number 4. If morality wasn't objective, then injustice would make no sense. In fact, punishing people for the crimes and injustice in the world would make no sense. The irony of the matter is that we would be unjust to punish people for matters of opinion, which would be self-refuting. How can we be unjust when injustice is just a matter of opinion to begin with? Would it be right to punish someone for their preference of strawberry over chocolate ice cream? Even then, would it be right to even say it is right or wrong? Punishing people for their crimes and injustice in the world only makes sense if we see them as sole responsible party for their actions and choices. We don't punish people for their personal preferences. You wouldn't punish somebody for liking a different flavor of ice cream. Number 5, evidence for moral pragmatism. We live like morality is objective. No one lives like morality is subjective. Even if one believes morality is subjective, they will still live like morality is objective. The reason for this is the fact that we are created in the image of God. Genesis 1:26-27. We talked about that when we last week when we did the exegetical commentary on Genesis 1. So we are image bearers of God, and since God is a moral being, we have objective morality hardwired into us. We intuitively know that morality is objective, which is why we get mad whenever we see injustice done to us or to others around us. Even if one chooses to believe that morality is subjective, we cannot live that way. This is strong evidence for objective morality, which is why I bring it up so much in my conversations. So if you're an atheist and you believe in subjective relativism, or some kind of form of subjectivism, then chances are I'm going to bring this up if I get in conversation about the existence of God, because ultimately, intuitively, we know that God exists, and ultimately, intuitively, we know that morality is objective. We can never live like morality is subjective. Nobody does. Objective morality. Two. Okay. Objective morality as a transcendental feature. We're going to talk more about this later on when we deal with the transcendental argument, but I just want to basically cover this at, while we're already talking about objective morality. One, the ultimate standard of justification for morality. God is the ultimate standard for justification or justification for ultimate standard or justification for objective morality. If God did not exist, then there would be no justification for objective morality. Two, apart from God, we cannot know what morality is. Our knowledge of morality comes from God. And not only so, but he is the standard for morality. He himself is the standard for morality. He is what ultimately gauges what is right and what is wrong. He is how we know good from evil and are able to distinguish them. Otherwise, good and evil, right and wrong, would be reduced to matters of opinion rather than something rooted in reality. Only the Christian biblical God provides such a justification for objective morality. Before we leave objective or morality at all from the moral argument, before we move on from the moral argument, we need to deal with the so-called problem of evil. Okay, there are two different kinds of problems, what's called the problem of evil. Two different forms of it, I should say. One is the logical problem of evil. The other is the evidential problem of evil. Both of these are fallacious, but the evidential problem of evil is a little bit stronger than the logical one. The logical problem of evil is the claim is that there is no logical is a logical inconsistency between the evil and suffering that exist in the world and the existence of a perfect, omnipotent, all-loving God. To the evidential problem of evil, the claim is that the evidence that the evil and suffering exist in the world makes it less probable than an omnipotent, all-loving God exists. A lot of times in the evidential problem of evil, they'll add a lot of specific examples of atrocious, horrible things that are happening in the world, and people are suffering, and poverty, and they'll throw in a lot of emotional stuff that can be very powerfully persuasive. And so this one's a little bit stronger than the logical one, but it also suffers from problems as well. All right, let's deal with the first one, problems with the logical problem of evil. First, the argument, even if valid, would not disprove God. It would only refute the nature of God as supported by Christianity. Two, the argument presupposes the existence of God in two ways. It actually presupposes the existence of God. For one thing, God would have to exist to provide a justification for the critic to be calling something good, evil, right, wrong, and suffering. Otherwise, these are just personal opinions of what they think. A logical contradiction presupposes the laws of logic, which are only justified within the Christian biblical worldview. I'll discuss that more here in a minute when I discuss the transcendental argument. All right, problems with the evidential problem of evil. Like the evidential problem of evil, this argument once again presupposes that God exists. The fact that you can point to injustice and suffering and say that it is objectively wrong is evidence for God's existence, not against it. Since you would have to have an ultimate standard to be your standard that gauge what's right and what's wrong. Otherwise, right and wrong will be subject to personal opinion instead. All right, number two, also, this does not disprove the existence of God, since God could have had a good reason for allowing the evil to continue. This argument, although stronger than the last one, since it tries to appeal to emotions, actually commits the either-or fallacy. Either evil doesn't exist or God doesn't exist. So the idea is that God cannot possibly exist at the same time as evil. However, God could allow evil if he has an alternative possibility, such as allowing evil for a good purpose. Ultimately, evil will be destroyed, and suffering does not always have to be something bad. Suffering can actually make people stronger as well. Also, it basically deals with the lack of the argument claims a lack of coexistence, because they're claiming that these can't coexist, but this is not the case. They can coexist God could decide have other reasons for allowing evil to continue to exist. However, there are other alternatives, such as God allowing evil to continue to serve a greater purpose. All right, let's talk about the ontological argument. This is the argument that argues from our thoughts about God to being of God, since God, by definition, is the most powerful being in existence, but this wouldn't be the case if God only existed in my thoughts. This, of course, is the weakest argument for the existence of God. I have never heard it really refuted, really, but it's not a well-popular argument. Most people don't use it. William Lane Craig doesn't use it. Typically, I don't use it either. So I do consider this the weakest of the 5 arguments that I'm going to be discussing with you. But it does make an interesting point, though. This argument does, however, make a point. How can we trust our very thoughts about anything rather than about God or anything else for that matter, unless God exists? In a strictly materialistic universe, there would be no reason to trust your very thoughts, since those thoughts are generated from random chemicals in your brain. How can we trust and justify our thoughts on what we believe or what we are convinced is true? Now, in the Christian biblical worldview, we can trust our thoughts, because our thoughts are the products of our mind, which is the immaterial part of our soul that allows us to think and have ideas and be self-aware and conscious and so forth. And that's part of our soul. And so we have a soul, we have an immaterial essence of ourselves that can exist beyond the grave. Something that in the atheistic worldview, they would not consider uh, people surviving beyond the grave, and they would not consider us having an essence, a soul to ourselves. So to them, mind is more or less your brain's inner workings and physical components. But then why would you even trust your thoughts, even about whether God exists or not? You wouldn't be able to trust your thoughts about anything if God did not exist. All right, now let's talk about the transcendental argument. The definition of the transcendental argument is this. This is the argument whereby a particular feature is required to make areas of intelligibility possible, but these areas cannot be justified apart from the Christian biblical worldview. Therefore, if Christianity is false, then these areas of intelligibility would not be possible. Therefore, it would be impossible for Christianity to be false. Essentially, this argument is saying it shows the truth of a claim, in this case, that Christianity is true, by showing the impossibility of the contrary. And you can also do that with each one of these transcendental features as well. The abductive form of this argument is knowledge requires X, but only the Christian biblical worldview can justify and make sense of X. Therefore, God's existence is highly probable. Or you can argue that it's absolutely certain. Because it's the only thing that can require a justification for it. Deductive form is it is impossible for X to be false, therefore X is true. It's impossible for Christianity to be false because Christianity, the Christian biblical worldview, is the only thing that can justify knowing anything at all. We cannot know anything on the atheistic worldview or other worldviews, because we would not have no basis for the laws of logic and things like that. And I'm going to get into those transcendental features here a little bit more here in a second. All right. Now, in the transcendental argument, there are certain features of reality called, I call them they're called transcendentals, or you can call them transcendental features. They exist of reality in a way that shows how we can know that reality is indeed true. If these were not true, we would not be able to know reality. But they're all justified within the Christian biblical worldview. A transcendental feature of reality is a paradigmal feature that is fundamental to either the nature of reality or to intelligibility, how we can know reality. There are fundamental presuppositions we all have and take for granted. These features are usually required to make reality knowable, and any attempts to disprove them will lead you to presupposing them in the process, and thus will lead you to their affirmations. Let me explain how that would work. Let's say you don't agree with the laws of logic. Well, obviously, for me to use the laws of logic, I have to presuppose them. They're very basic. I can't argue for anything without presupposing the laws of logic. So to de-affirm the laws of logic, to claim that the laws of logic are false, I would have to sit and try to disprove them. But how would I disprove them? Well, I would have to assume the laws of logic to try to disprove them. And so by trying to disprove them or claim the antithesis, I would ultimately end up affirming the laws of logic in the process. It'd be impossible for the laws of logic to not be true, because no matter what, I would have to presuppose it. Same thing is also the concept of truth is knowable. If I want to argue against the truth is knowable, then I'd have to claim that that the truth is not knowable. But then if truth is not knowable, how can I know truth is not knowable? And so I would have to presuppose that truth is knowable. And so as a result, affirm it anyhow. Examples of transcendental features would be like the laws of logic, the validity of logic, objective morality, the concept of self, consciousness, personal identity of time, induction, regularity of nature, etc. We are going to discuss some several of these. All right. Let's talk about the laws of logic. The laws of logic are like the law of identity, the law of non-contradiction, law of exclude middle. The law of identity is A and not B. Simply put, something is what it is and it's not what it's not. That's a simple way of putting it. A chair, for example, as I mentioned in the last video when I talked about the law of identity, a chair is a chair by definition. It is got all the defining characteristics that make it a chair. It is not a couch. You can't call it a couch because it's not got the defining characteristics of a couch. If it did have the defining characteristics of a couch, then it would be a couch. So a chair is a chair, but it's not a couch. The law of non-contradiction: A cannot be A cannot be non-A at the same time and in the same sense. Essentially put, something can't be true and false at the same time in the same way. Something can be true and false at different times, and something can be true and false in different senses. I can both be sitting here and standing my ground against the critics, for example, because I'm using the word stand in a different sense. But I can't be doing two things at the same time in the same way. Like I can't both be sitting here and standing here, meaning my physical posture, at the same time, because the 2 points would contradict each other. And then here's a similar one to the last one: the law of excluding middle, either A or non-A. Don't confuse this with the either or fallacy. The either or fallacy has other alternatives, simply put, because the two propositions do not contradict each other. This is talking about contradictory propositions. Only one of them can be true because they are in direct opposition to each other. Either God exists or doesn't exist. Those contradict each other. So there are propositions that they cannot both be true. I can't both exist and not exist. I can exist in different forms, but I can I don't have to exist as Brian Bowen. I could have a different name, a different look, a change of identity, change of face, whatever. But I can't both exist and not exist. It's impossible to do. Only one of those options would be correct according to the law of identity or law of excluded middle. All right, the concept of self. What makes me me? Imagine if you can look inside your own brain. Imagine if you could see the trillions of neurons, electrical synapses, and all your brain's chemistry and nerve connections. At what point within all that physical components is you? We see a sense of ourselves that goes beyond physical components and naturalistic processes. We have a sense of personal identity and awareness. This sense makes us human and makes us a higher form of life than that of the animals. We are aware of our own existence. Things matter to us. We feel conviction and a sense of individuality. We have the ability to make judgment calls and to problem solve. As Dopke said, what this establishes only the de dicto truth that self-awareness fundamentally involves the tendency to make judgments. Since this is a tendency to one's own future, it is, according to our metaphysics, a good candidate for what constitutes our identity. The reason why self-awareness so clearly involves the tendency to make judgments and inferences is that this is evident when we consider the self-aware creature from the point of view in virtue of which it has this awareness. And within the biblical Christian worldview, we get a concept of self, what constitutes me, and what constitutes you, as opposed to the worldviews associated with atheism, such as naturalism, where they have no justification for self, but rather in atheism, such concepts would be considered illusionary, making our very thoughts subject to material processes whereby one would not be able to trust or have confidence in their thoughts, since such thoughts are generated by material processes. Consciousness, in reference to the concept of self, consciousness. We are conscious beings. We are aware of our own existence. However, what makes us conscious and not animals? Is there something different about our brains that gives us higher sense of awareness? No, since human consciousness is immaterial and is a concept that goes beyond the physical components of our brain, then what is it? As J.P. Moreland said in an interview with Lee Strobel, he said, in short, consciousness consists of sensations, thoughts, emotions, desires, beliefs, and free choices that make us alive and aware. This is an interview with Lee Strobel in The Case of a Creator, page 268. All right, let's talk about personal identity over time. In a strictly materialistic universe, there would be no continuity between one version of you, say whenever you was 5 years old, versus the you of today. There is a physical development, but it would be different version of you. It wouldn't be the you over time. However, in the Christian worldview, there is a continuity between the different developments of you across time. The 5-year-old you is every bit the you that you are today. It was not just another version of you. It was you in every sense of the word. Atheism fails to justify this, so your memories of you are made obsolete. 2, the use of personal pronouns. This one's interesting. We have a sense of personal identity. We use personal pronouns to describe us. If we fail to have this sensory awareness of personal identity, we would speak of ourselves in third person. Now, again, I'm not talking about the fact that sometimes people joke around and speak in the third person or something like that, or as a literary device of Iliism, where, in ancient times where they might speak in the third person in a source or something. That happens as well. But I'm saying when we really refer to ourselves, when we talk about our choices, when we talk about our lives, when we use personal pronouns. I use some then as well. I use words like "our" and me and I and you and this kind of reflects a sense of identity for us. Why do we feel like that we have a personal identity? Why do we talk as if we have a personal identity? And so this is justified within the biblical Christian worldview. All right, let's talk about induction now on the regularity of nature. We're going to be talking about the regularity of nature and starting out with induction. In logic, induction is arguing from generalities what is generally true to particulars what is universally or specifically true. Induction, you can also argue from generalities to generalities. And to part from the biblical Christian worldview, there is no reason to assume that if something is generally true, the sun has risen to every day in the past, that it will always be the case. The sun will rise tomorrow just as it did today. The biblical Christian worldview makes induction possible. Patterns in nature. 1, there are patterns in nature that we have discovered and continue to discover. In the atheistic worldviews, such as materialism, naturalism, empiricism, and so forth, there are no justification to why we would expect patterns in nature. But in the biblical worldview, we would sense such patterns as what we would expect if God designed the universe and set order to it. Also, God promised after the flood that the basic cycles of nature will continue in the future as they have in the past, as long as the earth reigns. Genesis 8:22. Okay, again, continuing regularity of nature. Science. Science is predicated on the discovering patterns in nature and the regularity in nature. Thus, science is predicated on the Christian biblical worldview. This is the reason that most of the modern branches of science were founded by Christians. The scientific method itself was invented by Sir Francis Bacon, who was a Christian, and it is predicated on the Christian biblical worldview. Science would be impossible if God did not exist. All right. Before we leave the regularity of nature, we're going to talk about the laws of nature. I discussed this a little bit when I did my debate review of the resurrection debate between Bart Ehrman and Mike Licona, the 7-hour debate that they had. The laws of nature. There are laws in nature that govern how our universe is and regulate the orderly and day-to-day operation of it. These laws are not just descriptions of the way the universe is, although they are certainly that, but are governing rules by which to regulate the universe. In a strictly materialistic, random, and chance universe, there is no reason to expect order in the form of laws. Atheists want to have laws without the lawgiver, but within the Christian biblical worldview, we would expect laws to govern the universe and to provide order in nature. If the universe was designed, we would expect such laws to govern a universe designed by God. All right, we're going to deal with objective morality now as a transcendental feature. Objective morality as a transcendental feature of reality, as I went over a little bit of this earlier. Objective morality is paradigmal or basic. We cannot live reality as if morality is subjective. We each carry an intuitive sense of what's right and what's wrong, even if we may disagree with the specifics. There are at least some morals that we as human beings can, in one way or another, agree is objectively wrong. For example, we would agree that torturing babies for fun is wrong and inhumane. These are not just a matter of social conditioning, or else everyone would always disagree, and there would be no universal truth that transcends cultural boundaries and time. The justification for objective morality. Objective morality would only make sense if such justification is apart from self. If no justification existed, then morality would be subject to personal opinion, and there would be nothing that is intrinsically right or wrong. Also, any punishment of wrongdoing would also be unjustified, but you can't even claim this is unjustified, since this would presuppose a justification that transcends personal opinions and preferences. God's existence provides the ultimate justification for objective morality. Such justification is lacking in atheism and all associated worldviews. Okay, now, conclusion. Let's summarize the evidence for God's existence. The universe must have had a transcendent cause to its existence. The universe is amazingly designed for life, and the origin of information as well as its complexity leads us back to the conclusion that it must have come from an intelligent mind and not natural processes. The so-called problem of evil would make no sense apart from the existence of God, by which such justification for objective morality, of which there is strong evidence for, is grounded in. If God did not exist, this is number 4, if God did not exist, how can we even trust our thoughts, including our thoughts about God's existence or non-existence? Number 5, the transcendental argument for the existence of God, also known as TAG, shows us that there are certain transcendental features of reality that cannot be grounded unless God exists. The laws of logic, induction, regularity in nature, the laws of nature, the personal identity over time, consciousness, etc. These areas would make knowledge about reality impossible unless the Christian God exists. In addition to that, we have an intuitive sense of right and wrong, which can be only grounded in the existence of God. In closing, it would be impossible for the biblical Christian God to not exist. And I'm going to give you 5 reasons for that. 1, knowledge and science are predicated on the Christian biblical worldview. All of the areas of intelligibility are predicated on the Christian biblical worldview. Science would be impossible apart from the biblical Christian worldview. For God's existence provides justification for moral absolutes. And 5, therefore, it isn't just a high probability that God exists, it is an absolute certainty. All right, now we're going to cue me in the closing, and I'll see you in a minute. Well, that concludes Apologetics 101 and our presentation on the existence of God. Stay tuned next week when we talk about the origin of the universe with Dr. Jason Lau, an actual PhD astrophysicist. We'll be having that discussion with us next week on Wednesday. It's going to be recorded, but I should have it uploaded either that same day or the following day. One of the two. It has to be edited as well. So, but it should be there before that weekend. But don't miss that as we talk about the origin of the universe. This has been an exciting presentation I presented. I presented all the different arguments for the existence of God. We saw that the evidence is so strong that it can be absolutely certain that God exists. In fact, God is the ultimate justification for all the areas of intelligibility. We cannot know anything at all apart from the existence of God. And so, with that said, I mean, even someone claims that they can't know anything at all, then that would be self-refuting. But then how can you even know that you can't know anything at all? So the Transcendental Argument shows the truth of the proposition by showing the impossibility of the contrary. It's impossible for God not to exist in the way the Christians argue it, because otherwise we would not be able to know anything at all. We wouldn't be able to know anything about objective morality either. Absolute morals would not be able to exist apart from the Christian God. Christian God provides justification for absolute morality. It shows that we are justified in being able to trust and be confident in our thoughts and make judgment calls, and justification for consciousness, and the concept of self, and a personal identity, including personal identity over time, and those sort of things. And there's very, very good evidence in support of the existence of God, despite what atheists try to argue. There's very strong evidence for it. In fact, the fact that they have to borrow from our worldview shows that they intuitively know that God ultimately does exist. Otherwise, they would not have to borrow from our worldview. And so this has been an excellent presentation for the existence of God. I enjoyed making this presentation for you. Join us next week when we talk to Dr. Jason Lau about the origin of the universe. I'm hoping to have a conversation soon with Dr. Marcus Ross. I'm currently in conversation with him about doing an interview with him, and concerning his debate with Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy on Capturing Christianity. I'm hoping maybe try to see if I can make that part of the series, since it really kind of fits well with what we're discussing in chapter 1. I can't wait to get to chapter 2. I'm already thinking about chapter 2 because I'm going to be doing possibly several presentations or several videos concerning the so-called theory of evolution and so forth. And so that's going to be interesting. And so we're going to have a good time next week and over the next several weeks as we're making more and more videos in the Genesis series. Please join me on there, and don't forget to like the video and subscribe to my channel. I've got lots more videos planned up, and so I don't want you to miss a single one. And so don't forget to hit the notification bell, and also don't forget to drop me a comment in the comment section below. Tell me what you think. Give me your personal opinion on things, and let me know in the comment section whether you want me continue this beyond the first 11 chapters of Genesis, what kind of videos you would like to see me produce, etc. And then we'll go from there. All right. Thank you. And again, stay in the know. This is Brian Bowen for Apologetics 101, signing off.